does that then make Bitcoin possibly where it could be outlawed?
Well, I mean, I'm no expert, but my producer on my website, he is an IT guy, and he alerted me to all of this, and the reportage on this is accurate. It's not fake news. Anyone can, well, almost anyone can download the blockchain, and then if you have enough computer savvy, you can go in and actually look at it. And sure enough, it's in there. There are right now many, many, many links to child pornography in particular. And are we surprised? Are we surprised? So therefore, everybody who is essentially using Bitcoin, certainly anyone who is mining, who has a copy of the blockchain, on one of their machines, could conceivably be argued by nefarious people who were trying to say persecute people for their political beliefs or public speech against the regime or anything. It's not difficult to envision where this is going. So anyone who has this blockchain technically is in possession of links to child pornography, and I think they've also found somehow, and I don't understand this, not being a tech nerd, but apparently there's also some images somehow in the blockchain. Again, I don't understand that. When I saw this, when that was sent to me, I wasn't surprised at all. In fact, it makes pretty much perfect sense that when you're talking about something like the blockchain, a string of data, a string of information that the whole thing is contingent upon, that then what you could do is use that a vector of essentially criminalizing everyone. Now, we all know that, in our culture and in our society, that we're all felons. There's a really good website out there. I can't remember what it's called, if it's 5 a day or 7 a day or something like that. And it's just somebody, going through the US code and demonstrating how pretty much every single person in the United States commits, according to the US code, commits something like 5 felonies a day. And this is nothing new, because as a culture and as a society descends, and this is kind of counterintuitive, the further away you get from God, the more immoral a society becomes, the larger the code of law becomes, because that's what tyrannies do. They want to just get it to where everyone is potentially or can be selected or chosen at any time to be designated a felon. And this is an old tactic. So it's absolutely no surprise that the Bitcoin blockchain and all of the other crypto blockchains would then have something like this going on. Now the question is this is it putting the child pornography into the blockchain? Is that simply actual users and traders in child pornography just trying to use this blockchain as their means of communicating with each other in a clandestine way? Or is it, in fact, nefarious actors inserting this in, and even state-sponsored actors, whatever, inserting this in to, in fact, make everyone, quote-unquote, not just guilty of a felony, but guilty of one of the most heinous felonies that there really is in the world, the sexual slavery of children and trading in that? Is it a combination of the two? I don't suppose that's the most important question, but I think what it does speak to, and I know not a lot of your listeners are involved in these cryptocurrencies, and I've been warning about them since the beginning. First of all, because the thing that occurred to me is this simply doesn't make any sense, because what happens when the electricity goes out? What happens when the lights go out? What happens when just the internet goes out? What the hell good is having this, or having assets stored in this, using this medium, if you can't get out? I remember dealing with something like this in my days as a futures broker. What good is having, for example, a pork belly contract that you've bought weeks or months ago at a price significantly lower than where it is now? It's showing an open profit on your equity run. But what the hell good is that position if you can't get out? If there's no way to liquidate that position without, the criminals in Chicago in the pork belly pit sliding you all the way back down and taking all of your paper profit away. What the hell good is having a stop loss on a position if, the market will not honor, will not elect, and that happened to me in the silver market in the great silver debacle of May of 2011. I had people who were long silver and were very disciplined and had stop losses underneath the market. And when that great manipulated event of May of 2011 happened, and the market sold off, it went through their stop loss price. I call down to the floor and say, "Can I please have my fill?" Because as we all know, a stop loss means that when your price is touched, your order converts into immediately a market order, and so you're owed a fill. And then of course they called back to me and said, "Well, the broker elected not to execute your stop." Well, this is criminal. What the hell good is having a stop loss order if the rules of the game are not going to be observed? If there's no liquidity, if you're trying to sell and there's no bid, if you're trying to buy and there's no offer, what good are any of these things? And it's kind of the same obvious problem with the cryptos. And now we have this extra added layer of this nefarious activity. All right, at what point are we going to look at this and say, look, this is a proof set. This is a direct proof set of what we've been saying about how all money, all currencies, all of these things are truly related and are contingent upon the underlying morality of the people who are backing said currency and, the culture in general. So it's almost like, what you say to a little kid and say, this is why we can't have nice things. This is why we can't do things like this in this culture, because the culture is so spectacularly corrupt that the second you set up anything like this and provide, obviously this is a massive string of data that's, publicly available with conceivably anonymity as to who is putting what into this blockchain. The anonymity is what we're looking at here. Well, obviously, if you live in an absolutely debauched, immoral, godless, post-Christian culture, then obviously what you have to expect is something like this is going to happen, and there's going to be people, swapping child pornography links with each other using this vector. And so that first asks the question, wait a minute, who's backing this? Who are we dealing with here? Who do we go to? Who do we appeal to when things like this are happening? Well, you can't. There is no one. That's the question. Who is behind this? Who is backing this? In the sense, when I say who is behind this, not in the sense of it's a grand conspiracy, but in the sense of, the U.S. Federal Reserve notes as backed by the full faith and credit of the government of the United States of America, or whatever the exact verbiage is. And we see those words. And now today, I think probably all of your listeners completely agree that the words backed by the full faith and credit of the government of the United States is a laugh line. It is a laugh line. And so if that is a laugh line, then good grief, when you look at something that is like cryptocurrencies, where there's essentially no one behind it, at least no one identifiable. There's nobody that can be held to account. And at that point, what it becomes is it becomes just kind of like a microcosm for the overall culture. And so you say to me, Anne, are you willing to trust storing your wealth in a paradigm that is a microcosm of the broad American neo-pagan post-Christian culture? And no, I am not comfortable with that. I am not comfortable with that at all, not even remotely close. And especially when there's absolutely no means of redress for any of this that's going on. And now we're getting into notions where this could be used to, nefarious actors in the government. They're clearly looking to censor speech, censor political speech, make sure that all discussion, preaching of Orthodox Christianity, especially with regards to the sixth commandment, which is, of course, thou shalt not commit adultery, and everything that's under that category header. Any sort of discussion of that is now actively being branded as hate speech, criminalized, so on and so forth. Okay, let's look at the Venn diagram. People who are in good faith, trying to find some sort of an alternative, and trying to find some way of protecting their wealth, an alternative from the U.S. dollar, an alternative from the mainstream banking system. People in good faith looking at these cryptos and saying, well, maybe this is a way for me to protect myself. Let's look at the Venn diagram of people who are Orthodox believing Christians and do hate sin and do hate sodomy and sexual immorality and all of these things, and do hate abortion and et cetera, et cetera. And then say, okay, there's a higher than average percentage of that group of people who are going to be looking at and attempting to use these cryptos. What can we do so that we can get all of them, quote unquote, guilty of a felony by being essentially in possession of child pornography files, so that when we identify them by their speech or by their, buying patterns and so on and so forth, we can then immediately go and selectively enforce this, knowing that by no fault of their own, they might have on their computer at home a copy of the blockchain. And if they're mining, they absolutely do, obviously. And they could then be prosecuted for participation in child pornography or the transmission of child pornography or something like that. It's pretty obvious. It's not surprising, and it just goes to show you have to constantly be asking yourself, who am I associating with? Who am I doing business with here? And I don't think that it's acceptable at this point to look at something like these cryptos where you have absolutely no idea. And that's the point. You have no idea who you're associating with. You have no idea who is backing this. And then you're essentially letting these people, in a certain sense, into your home so that they can plant phony evidence against you to be used by a nefarious state. We just have to wake up. And I hope a lot of people that were in cryptos and that were in Bitcoin were able to salvage, if not maybe even come out ahead. And hey, if you came out ahead on it, God bless you. I'm very happy for you. Thanks be to God. But get out of there and stay out of there and just look at the volatility. I think we've discussed this before on your show, Elijah. Markets that are healthy, markets that have integrity, are not choppy and volatile like this. That is not normal. The choppier and more volatile a market is, the less integrity it has. And so that's another key indicator right there. And I really don't think that at this point you can just shrug your shoulders and chalk it up to growing pains in terms of this market. I think it's something deeper and more profound than that.
Do you think in principle, though, that Bitcoin can be stopped and actually made illegal? I mean, is there any way to actually enforce that law? if it were to become a law that, you can't use Bitcoin anymore?
Well, at some point, it's going to, if you're thinking, and if the mindset is, and I can't imagine that it wouldn't be, that the entire point of this thing is to be able to eventually to get to the point where, you go into the supermarket, you go into a restaurant, you go into a clothing store, whatever, and instead of having to go through that extra transactional step of going from the cryptocurrency to the local currency, US dollars, let's say, that you just automatically are crypto to crypto with somebody. I think that's what's the point of it if that's not the eventual goal that they want to get to, you see? So I think that as long as you have to have that interstitial step of converting to the local currency, that yes, it can be, because wasn't it South Korea? Hasn't South Korea come out and said, we're not going to sanction any transactions here in the Korean, what's the Korean won? It's a yuan too, I think. We're not going to sanction any of this. And that was a cause of, again, some extreme volatility, huge sell-off, massive chop, just when South Korea said, we're going to put some barriers up to this. The other thing in terms of can you get rid of it, I just hasten to remind everybody, you can get rid of it if you turn off the electricity. If you turn off the internet, it doesn't exist. I mean, I puzzle at the fact that there are so many people who've been on the precious metals bandwagon and who have been, very sound on the notion that, physical possession is of massive importance. And, Barnhart axiom 2A, or whatever you want to call it, that if you can't stand in front of it with an assault rifle and physically defend it, then you don't own it and you probably never did. So the same people who are like, yeah, right on, that this is why we want to have precious metals and so on and so forth. We want to physically possess it. And it's largely, again, talking about Venn diagrams. There's a huge overlap of the group of people who were totally sound on the notion of physical possession and physically backed money, and in terms of precious metals, who are now completely content to utterly abandon that and turn everything over to the caprice of whoever it is standing next to the electricity switch, or even just the switch on the internet. Talk about not having possession of something. I mean, at least I can go get my purse and I can whip out some $100 bills. I've got something. If they want to take away this crypto thing, I mean, there's literally nothing you can do. Nothing. It's even more precarious far more precarious than Federal Reserve notes.
Now, moving on here, the other topic I'd like to discuss today is the stock market. Now, it seems like we might be seeing a reversal here, starting this January when we saw the correction, and now it went even lower. What is your perspective on the current state of the stock market? Are we in a reversal here? Are we in a downtrend?
Well, I mean, it's even relative, good grief, I'm only 41 years old. And so when I got into the business in 97, things have changed so much. And with regards to the stock market, I think there's been even more change in the stock side of things than there has been, on the futures and commodity side, because up until 10, 15 years ago, I guess now, most of the liquidity in the stock market was actual human beings. We have now made this transition to where the vast majority of the volume every day and of the liquidity in the stock market is algorithms, and it has nothing to do with normal human beings. There really aren't that many people who are calling their stockbroker at Merrill Lynch or Edward Jones or whatever it is and are trading. I mean, there are still some people who are doing it, but most aren't. now people have exposure to the stock market, but it's mostly in terms of their retirement accounts, which people by and large are not permitted to liquidate. I'm still all the time get emails from people saying, I want out of this 401k. I see this thing as a bubble. I want to get out of this. I want to take profits. They won't let me out. Yeah, of course. So when I see this downside chop and this topping action, first of all, it goes back to what we were talking about a minute ago, and that is markets of integrity do not have massive volatility like this. Massive volatility is indicative of a lack of integrity in a market. So that's the number one thing to remember. The number two thing to remember is, where is this sell paper coming from? Who's putting in these sell orders? Is this individual people? Is this algorithms? Or is this the mega banks? Trying to manipulate things and so on and so forth. And the other risk is yes, of course this is a bubble. It's a massive, massive, massive bubble. And a lot of people who are way on the Trump bandwagon are saying, oh no, this is all completely legitimate because Trump is in. Guys, I'd hasten to remind you, look at what has just happened, where the debt is now over 21 trillion. They're adding 2 trillion a year. The budget that he just signed off on was a complete and total capitulation. They were given the Democrats, and I mean, I hesitate to even make any differentiation right now, but at this point, between Republicans and Democrats, because I think we all know it's exactly the same damn thing. It's the same group of people. They're just putting on this show, pretending that there's two teams and pretending that there's some sort of antagonism or difference in agenda between them, just simply to keep people lulled into the sense that they are in any way being represented in their government, which clearly they aren't. So total complete capitulation, massive exploding debt, everything keeps expanding. And you say, okay, why would there be this continued optimism? Well, look at the unemployment numbers. Well, look at how the unemployment numbers were totally manipulated throughout the entire Obama regime. Why do you think that manipulation has stopped? Why do you think? I mean, during the Obama regime, it was just unemployment, people unemployed for so long that what they started doing is statistically excluding them from the workforce. And so the workforce just kept shrinking and shrinking and shrinking, and they just kept doing this until they got the quote unquote unemployment rate down to 5%. So when Obama's in office, we're all going to look at this and point at it and say, this is what you're doing. You're cooking the books, you're cooking the numbers. We see it, it's obvious. This is all BS. But then as soon as Trump gets in, we look at the same unemployment figures coming out of the same offices of the same people, the same government bureaucrats, because none of that turns over and none of that changes. Okay, so now they're putting these figures out, and since Trump is in the White House, we're going to say, oh look, this is all gospel truth. Well, of course it isn't. Don't you think maybe they've been using that as just another way to justify this continued blowing of this stock market bubble? So I'm obviously skeptical of all of it. And as you know, since I declared my tax strike and shut down the brokerage and everything, I've been telling people you need to disengage from this financial system and from these equity markets and the whole nine yards. You're playing with fire. And again, reiterating, if there are people out there who have made a profit and had windfall, I'm very happy for you. That's wonderful. I'm glad that your life did not end in financial catastrophe and all that. That's absolutely wonderful. But how long are we willing to look at this paradigm, tolerate this It's obvious what's going on. It's obvious it's a bubble. The fact that no one will let you get out, the fact that there's no human liquidity, and the fact that you're looking at this massive, massive chop in a market that's that big. Again, that's the other thing. The bigger a market is, if the market has any sort of integrity, the more, the more of participants there are, the easier it is to take advantage of inefficiencies and arbitrage and do things like that. So you look at one stock that is undervalued and buying interest generates in that. You look at another stock that's clearly overvalued, which basically all of them are now. But just for the sake of argument, you see a stock that's overvalued and, selling pressure comes in. And the more participants you have and the bigger a market is, the more it keeps things smoothed out and the more it reduces chop and volatility like this. And the fact that you have a market that is as big as the stock market is now, that's experiencing such profound chop, is just another testament to its illegitimacy and why one should be getting out.
And I know we've discussed this before, but if you can reiterate for our viewers, if the stock market is not a place to be putting your finances right now, what is your perspective on where more undervalued assets lie?
Oh goodness, that's tough. I don't want to make any trading recommendations or anything like that. What I would always go back to is I would go back to the things that are utterly essential for human life. So, food-based, within reason. Ideally, one should be owning land, livestock, meat-producing livestock, dairy-producing livestock, whatever. But I guess the criteria that I would put to things would be, is this company or is this paradigm something that is absolutely essential to human life? And if it isn't, if it's anything extraneous, if it has to do with entertainment or, even technology and computing and things like that, that is not necessary for human life. I think the things that will hold their value the most will be those that are tied directly to human life. So I guess food and things like that. But again, I do not want to make any buy recommendations for any equities.
All right. Well, Ann Barnhardt, thank you so much for sharing your time with us today. Before we let you go, did you want to share with the viewers any last thoughts you had and where they can find you online?
Well, sure. As always, I'm at www.barnhart, BARNHARDT.biz. That's pretty much the only place that I live on the internet. And we're doing a podcast over there. I have an in-house proprietary podcast about once a week, once every 10 days, something like that.